Welcome to Om on the Range, where we share the practice of meditation, the wisdom of Western Buddhism, and the refuge of our community. Whether you are new to meditation or a longtime practitioner, committed or curious, this offering is here to share solutions, stories, and support. Happiness and better health are available to everyone. It just takes practice. This is Om on the Range. Welcome to episode number 25 of Om on the Range. My name is Whit, W-H-I-T, and I will be your host today, as always. I'm very glad to be here, and I'm very glad that you are here as well. This week, we welcome back co-host, teacher, and all-around good guy, Mr. Kyle Webster. Welcome, Kyle. How are you?
Good. Thank you, Ed. How are you?
Good. So you were last on the show week 9, so it's been about 4 months. It seems like it wasn't that long ago, but I do trust numbers, Kyle. So hopefully we can recreate some of that magic from week 9. On the show today, I wanted to discuss the recent meditation retreat we both attended. I also wanted to cover some of the information we learned. And then maybe we could get into what classes and presentations you have coming up in 2026. That work for you?
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, so let's start with the softball. How was the retreat for you?
Yeah, the retreat was incredible. And gosh, how do you even describe that kind of experience, right? It was tough at first, right? I think there's this sort of shedding that has to take place as we move from the daily life into the sort of more still place. And,
Right.
and whatever's accumulated since the last time we had some degree of stillness kind of comes up and kind of gets processed through. But after the first full day, so say probably starting Wednesday, it was just really just incredible sort of depth of peace and attention and concentration and connection with everybody in the room. And it was just, I practically floated away on Friday.
Yeah. So I think our experiences were a touch different just because of the roles we were playing, but I was very impressed. I felt like you were very committed to what was going on and what the instructions were. And it wasn't so much that I wasn't committed. It was just, like I said, my role was a little bit different for this one. But I could see the work being done. So you thought it took about 24 hours to settle in? Is that about right?
I would say, yeah. So kind of the evening of the second day. I mean, the first day was pretty short, right? So we kind of arrived, we had some dinner, we chit-chatted, and then we got in 7 o'clock or so that night into the real meat and potatoes of it, right? And so I would say, probably 24 hours from arriving was about the time it settled out.
Did you find any of the meditation sessions difficult?
I think definitely the one on Monday night and many of them on Tuesday were challenging, just in that the brain really wanted to drift off and engage in other stuff, right? Like all of the momentum of all of the thoughts that had accumulated since the last time I was kind of on retreat. Last time I was particularly still, they were there, right? And so it's like trying to slow down an aircraft carrier and turn it around, right? And it takes a while to slow that momentum.
Yeah.
And it's effortful, right? So it takes some work to be like, no, we're not going to engage in that. Let's come back to the breath. Remember, we're coming back to the breath, right? And you want to have grace and gentleness with yourself, but it does take a certain degree of energy. And once that starts to settle out, once the mind sort of stops throwing so many of those distractions up, it starts to become much more effortless and it starts to flow more. At least
I think it's
experience.
interesting. I'm sorry. I think it's interesting how much effort you have to put into doing nothing.
Yeah.
Right. But it's so true. You have to be so mindful, and so it's a weird dynamic to, I'm going to try my very hardest to not do anything. And also, while I'm doing this and failing for the most part, I'm also going to remember to be kind and laugh about it as best I can. Without disturbing anybody with my weird maniacal laughter. So, but yeah, I thought it was very interesting settling into that. And from my perspective, watching people trying to kind of work through that.
Mm-hmm.
it's advantageous for this kind of stuff that you have a practice that you're engaging with every day. Because I think there were people there that approached meditation with, hey, I'm going to practice at this retreat.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would just be so daunting, because
I was super impressed. Like there were people that just showed up like off the street, never having meditated before, and just ran right into a 5-day meditation retreat. I'm so impressed. And I think that the magic of that is in this retreat container, your decisions are essentially none, right? Coffee or tea, like that's the big decision of the day.
Right.
The inputs are minimal. You're not having TV, you're not having your phone, you're not scrolling, you're not talking. And so the responsibilities are low, and also the intention is clear. What we're trying to do, we're trying to be still, we're trying to center in, and the whole group supports you toward that intention. Like everybody's there for the same reason. All 30 something of us, we're all coming together at the same time, trying to do the same thing. And there's this natural settling that happens, almost like whether you meditate or not. Just the fact that you're in that container is going to still, just because it has to, right? You don't have these new things coming in. Your brain just kind of runs out of fuel as far as things to explore. And so regardless of how, quote unquote, successful we feel in our ability to still the thoughts, they're just going to happen. And I think we noticed that as we did that sort of closing circle with everyone who was there, even if they were brand new to it, was having profound degrees of sort of new ways of seeing the world as a result of that experience, which was incredible. And then we can take that into the daily life, and then you start to notice the contrast, right? I was driving home and I'm just like, oh my gosh, bombarded by all the fast food and the mobile phone advertising and all that. It's like, oh my gosh, this world is just so loud.
Yeah.
Right? And you start to notice, well, okay, how am I engaging with this, right? Do I need to give it my attention, or can I keep that stillness in it can really change the whole architecture of the way that we interact with the world.
I think with practice also, as you settle in, and sometimes it takes a day or an hour, sometimes it takes years, but if you stay with it, at some point, not only do you get all the benefits to your health, but you also start to gain that insight that, that no one would tell you, hey, sit here and try to figure out, how to be more aware, more accepting, more patient. It's really just sit here and see what comes up. But those insights all start to flood through, and they are pretty profound. I always felt like they're much greater than things that I would ever be able to understand on my own, unless I just sat here and shut up and let them be.
Yeah, and what I find with that is, sort of the deeper we get, the less things appear in my experience to arise, and it's more the noise has settled enough and the volume's turned down enough that you come into contact with things that were always there and always true at a very somatic, visceral level, and they just become so obvious.
Right.
It's like when I'm not selfing so hard.
Yes.
You notice, hey, life's can actually flow pretty easy when I'll just show up and I'll bring attention to the moment. I'll interact from the heart space, and I don't have to do all of this extra stuff.
Right.
Anymore.
Right. It's very much addition by subtraction, at least for me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's true, but I do like to say it once a show. So
good. But got it in.
Yes, so there's that. So that's it. We can wrap it up now.
All right.
So I was curious, during a retreat, were there any sessions or lessons that were particularly impactful, whether it was somebody sharing with us or just what you found on your own?
I think so. My focus this retreat was primarily to deepen my samatha practice. And so for anybody who's not super familiar with meditation, there's samatha practice around concentration and building that mental muscle that allows you to focus and to bring your attention back to the breath and to stay there as it wants to wander away. And vipassana then is sort of the natural consequence of that, in that the more still the mind gets, the more these insights starts to arise, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of what we were talking about on this retreat was saying, okay, now here are the 3 marks of existence, ponder those, see how they're showing up in your practice. And I really wanted to use this container to deepen my samatha concentration practice. So to some extent, I was talking about this with Robert the other day, that I kind of let him come in one ear and out the other, but then I would notice things that he was talking about show up in the samatha practice. So they were probably having more of an impact than I expected. And I think the not self piece is probably the one that was most impactful because it's the one that's least obvious in a
Right.
faith life.
Right. And it's interesting when we go through the Dharma talk, and then Robert or Victor, who were the two main teachers, we'll always take a moment to take questions. And this is part wisdom that I'm going to share, but it's mostly just me being impatient. It's that, hey, instead of asking questions, just sit with it. Just wait and see where it shows back up. And I know that's hard, and I know it's counterintuitive for people. And again, it's not me being wise. It's mostly just me being impatient because, I don't want to, I feel like I've taken on enough just through the talk, for example, or just through the session. So then it's like, hey, let's let it sit for a day or an hour or whatever we can give it, and then see. But it also goes back to that, hey, whatever was shared, will land where it's supposed to. And sometimes it takes a while, sometimes you just have to be patient with it.
Yeah. And I think especially these things, 3 marks of existence, and especially not self, they're not easy.
Right.
And it's like you'll hear something and it's like you want to have some sort of mental understanding of what's going on there. And this is one of the things that we talk about a lot in the basics class is what is it? How does it fit? Getting a stronger understanding of that, which just then naturally leads us to live with less craving and aversion and then less suffering. But it takes some degree of conceptualization to understand what we're even looking for.
Right. Right. So let's touch on a couple of those, if you don't mind. So,
Sure.
like you said, the 3 marks of existence that we discussed and were taught, maybe some of us more than others, suffering, impermanence, and then no self. I am pretty comfortable with the first 2. I thought that the third one was difficult, so we're going to do it in that order. Suffering is something, whether you're a Buddhist or not, whether you practice or not, I think we all understand, if we have even just a minimal amount of self-awareness, that there is some suffering, not that's outside the pain that life sometimes brings. Even if everything is fine, you're bored. I could use more money. I should be smarter than this. I should be more popular. I should be wealthier. There's all these things that the mind and the ego are constantly throwing up, because we're always looking at we're never happy with what is. We're always looking to how to improve stuff. So the only thing I'm going to add to that real quick before I turn it back over to you is I found it interesting in this retreat that it dawned on me, and I think Victor said it, that sometimes we think things happen and that leads to suffering. It's raining and I didn't want it to rain, so now I'm upset about that. But I've also noticed that a lot of times I'm suffering and then I go out and I find a reason for it, and I'd never really noticed that before, that it worked both ways. Have you experienced that as well? Does that seem true to you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of the body experiences some unpleasantness and then the brain goes looking for a cause sometimes, right? Because we're chronically unable to sit with unpleasantness. And this is like one of the core problems that causes so many issues, is it's like we can't allow this unpleasantness to exist, therefore we must go think of trying to find ways to change it, where we don't realize if we just sit with it and allow it, it'll pass. None of it's inherent.
Right. I think sitting at a longer meditation retreat gives you a real opportunity to do that. Because like you said, your mind sooner or later will slow down to the point where you start really utilizing what the teachers are sharing. I suppose the wiser, more experienced practitioners try to do that right away. Even people like myself, for example, sometimes it takes a little longer, but then you realize, hey, let's just sit with that. We don't have to understand it all, but let's just sit with the idea that this is suffering, and let's just see how it feels. Where does it show up? What's it like? How would you describe it? Just building another way to build that mental muscle that you mentioned.
Yeah. Can I allow it to exist?
Right.
Can I feel this in my body and just be with it? And then what happens? Oh my gosh, it fades. Oh, okay, so maybe it's not quite as threatening as I initially thought it was.
Right. Right. Which, by the way, is a beautiful segue into impermanence,
Yeah.
because that was another one that one of the 3 marks of existence, but also that it always clears up so much when you remember that, hey, it's not forever. And hey, I do know how this ends, at least, this time through. I don't know when, I don't know how, but I do know, that it's not permanent. So sitting again for long periods of time, or numerous times for 30 minutes, does give you that space and that guidance and that container to do those kind of evaluations and apply awareness to those big marks of existence, because they're pretty heavy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and kind of the way I like to think about all 3 of those marks of existence, we go into a little bit in the class, is these are their core beliefs that we all share. Like, as a human being with this human brain architecture, we all tend to share this fundamental belief. One, that we're completely separate. 2, that things outside of us can provide lasting happiness. And 3, then we'll live happily ever after.
Right.
And that's the baseline of every fairy tale, everything we're taught growing up, right? And so it follows that if that were true, then trying to get things to be a certain way, so craving for some things to come into our lives, being averse to some things and trying to get them out of our lives, would be perfectly logical, right? Like, it's a very logical conclusion from this set of beliefs that this is what we should do. Unfortunately, those beliefs don't line up with reality. And I think that's what the meditation and the retreat container allow us to see. It's like, oh, wow, this isn't as true as I initially thought that it was. Right. And just that shift in belief a little bit can make a profound difference, because we are so busy trying to get things to be a certain way. So craving for certain things, aversion to other things, that we miss out on the magic of the moment. And people talk about being present, and the only reason we're not present is because we're thinking about what we want and what we don't want, and trying to get those things in our lives, right? And this incredible simplicity and wholeness and peace, love, connection, whatever you want to talk about, is available in every moment. And that retreat opportunity gives us a way to connect with that at a very real level that maybe we've never connected with before. And what I find is the more retreats I go on, the deeper that gets, and the more obvious it becomes when I'm not doing that, which it becomes a virtuous circle. It sort of self-reinforces.
I think it's also interesting when not that I've had a lot of discussions with people who don't practice about these kind of concepts, but because because I'm 60 years old and I have the experience here in life, so many people, the last thing they want to hear is that life is suffering and it's impermanence. And by the way, that self that you're protecting isn't real.
Right.
And by the way, it's not because Buddhists think that they're smart, that we figured something out. It's that the other ways don't work. It's just a practical, it seems so odd. Again, it's addition through subtraction, but it's like, hey, let's focus on these things that we've been brought up to believe these are negative, when in fact they're not. They're just the way it is. And suffering is something that we have been brought up to believe is, well, it is. It's dissatisfaction. We'd like to push it away, but we also need to understand that suffering is the thing that it's the fuel for everything that people do, both good and bad. We don't get to the moon without suffering. We don't. Math is good. You need math to hit the moon as well. But suffering is that thing that helps us, because we decided that it would be better if we went to the moon. So I just think it's interesting that people sometimes, they don't see it all the way through. Everything's almost neutral, frankly. There was no question in there.
Yeah, I think I would maybe challenge just ever so slightly this idea that suffering is the fuel that drives us, because my experience has been that I've had moments of very little suffering, not because suffering wasn't available to me, but because I hadn't chosen it.
Right. No, I think that's a good point.
Yeah, and that, but in those places, there's still lots of motivation to act.
Yes.
And so suffering is entirely optional, and it just takes a lot to begin to see that, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of practice to get to that point to say, wow, pain's mandatory. Like we're not going to get away from pain. We
Right.
have a human body, we have nerve endings. That's just what's going to happen. But the suffering we add on top of that is frankly of our own choosing. But we have an awful lot of pushes in that direction, and so it takes some effort for us to pull back from that.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point. I think that if you have some wisdom and you've seen or learned that suffering is optional, that it's probably not always 100% true. But I do think that suffering has driven a lot of, because it's us looking at a situation saying, this isn't enough. This isn't right. I can do this better. I can make this better. And even that's fine as long as you can keep it in perspective and understand, what it is and not get caught up in it. So, so now I think we have danced around it long enough. Let's talk a little bit about no self, because that was a challenge for me. How was it for you?
It's always a challenge. And I think one of the things with not self that's hard is there's so many aspects to it that we tend to conflate with each other. And we use our terminology is so limited to describe this experience that you end up starting using the same terms for different things, and then it starts to get very confusing, right? And so, one of the classic ones is this idea that you're not your thoughts, right? That thinking is happening. There's a thinking organ you have, just like there's a detoxifying organ in the liver and a heart, a blood pumping organ in the heart. It's just the think's just brain's just a thinking organ, right? And so it's taking everything it's taken into this point, and it's trying to evaluate it, trying to predict the future, and it's trying to help. It's doing what it can, but growing up, we were always told, well, you are your thoughts. You're the one thinking the thoughts.
Right.
And that's one of the amazing things about some deeper practices. You start to say, hey, these thoughts are happening and I've got nothing to do with it.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So that's one degree of like not self, of like, okay, well, that's not a self. And that already can be massively therapeutic and provide a lot of relief to be like, oh my gosh, okay.
Right.
Those are coming from somewhere, but not quote me, right? And then you can go to another level and talk about the false self in terms of sort of the personalities that we form. And that when we're young, no one's modeling to us that we can live from the heart space and just be present and then have our needs met. Like nobody's doing that, right? It's true, but nobody's teaching us that, right? And so we begin to form these identities to get our needs met. So we're the good little boy or girl, or we're the rebellious little boy or girl, or we're the athlete, or we're the smart kid, or whatever. And we form these identities to get our needs met. And then over time, we start to realize that that's not a great fit anymore. We're so attached to these ideas, and then anything that threatens that identity, let's say we're the athlete, we start to age a little bit. We kind of lose a step, right? Okay, hold on. Well, who am I then, right? It becomes an existential threat to my ability to get my needs met. Never mind, it was needs we had when we were 4,
Right.
not needs we had when we're 40 or 60, right?
Right.
And so this idea of not self is, hey, I'm not my labels. I'm not my gender. I'm not my age. I'm not my nationality. I'm not my skin tone. I'm not any of these things, right? There's something there below all of that, right? So that's another level of not self. And you can kind of keep going with all of these things. And there's just so much depth to that topic. And you start to realize, okay, I'm none of these things, but there's still something so visceral there, so real. Okay, what is it? What am I? What am I really? And that's where I think touching into the magic of the moment is so compelling.
Yeah, Robert Brumman, our teacher and good friend, was the one who took this on as one of his teachings, one of his Dharma talks. And I don't know if you recall this, but he spoke about it a little bit in the morning, and then we had lunch, and then he gave a full-fledged Dharma talk. In the morning, I was on board. I thought I had a pretty good idea of what we were talking about. And then by 2:30 or 3, I was like, I don't know. I don't know who I am. I don't know who you are. I don't know what we're doing here. But I think, since then, I've always been a big believer or tried to practice hey, we're not our thoughts. Not going to penalize anybody for their thoughts. We're not going to penalize mostly ourselves, right? Because that's the easiest place to find them. But like you said, starting to understand that there is no solid identity, but it's an ever-changing process. And while that's very difficult to work with at a practical level, it's also very freeing. It's another one of those big walls that you kind of tear down and start to feel more comfortable in this life. And I've got a lot of work to do with that. But I thought it was a super interesting point. I thought all of them were, but that one in particular, because it's not something that had been kicking around in my no self head, you know?
Yeah. It's interesting how when we're able to drop those identity labels, or at least hold them less tightly than we used to, well, then nothing can hurt us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, what threat? Who cares?
Right.
Right. And so it on the one hand is incredibly destabilizing. On the other is incredibly freeing. And I think this is where kind of coming off retreat is so interesting, because you have to now take these ideas and integrate them into your life. And so we talked before we left about how, hey, you're going to feel a little off for the next day, week, month, as these things start to filter into your day-to-day life, start to see things just a little bit differently.
It also gives you that freedom to enjoy, like you said, that the magic of the moment. You know, so if you are an athlete and you don't have a set of circumstances or expectations you have to defend. And I said athlete because that's what I was really going to go with, but really anybody, right? It's okay that today this is how the day played out, because you're constantly showing up. At least you're trying, and the more you practice, the more aware you are of that. So that increases that real life, real moment existence. But that idea that I wasn't at my best today. It's like, well, this was your best today. That this was, you're always doing your best. It may not have worked out the way you wanted to, but there are things that got done, and there are opportunities here to learn and to and to let them go. So it's very interesting, and I feel like episode 35 we could spend just on no self, but hopefully I'll have more intelligent things to say about it. I'm not making any promises, but I'm hopeful. So let's talk a little bit about, it's January. We just turned the calendar over. Do you have any big, I'm not going to ask about resolutions because that's not what we do, but what are your intentions for 2026?
That's a good question. I think coming off retreat was so poignant because it really put the whole year into perspective. And I think it's taking the things that arise on retreat and in my practice and really trying to integrate those into day-to-day life. And it becomes a little bit hard to describe in a certain sense, but it's, really trying to settle into the magic of the moment more, but not in a clinging should kind of way.
Yeah.
But in a somatic, like, feel that the tingling in the hands and the feet and the energy flows that are there in every moment when we'll just connect with it and just let this moment be enough. Right. And that's just such a challenge, I think, for me, certainly. It's a lifetime process, but one I want to engage a little bit more in this year.
Yeah, that's part of the joy, right? As you start to remove the obstructions, and 98% of them are all inside. It's easy to pick the ones outside and say, I should do that. I should. Yeah. But as you free up that, it automatically gives you more power and more energy and more space. And really all those things are infinite. It's just a question of, hey, how much can I free up? How free can I become? It's been such an interesting, I guess it's been a long time as a long-time practitioner, but it's just it feels like every day there's more and more to be found and to be utilized, to be shared, except for about the 8th or 9th day when you suddenly realize I should be a lot farther along than this. There's always that one day or that one moment, and then you're like, it's just a thought. I'm fine. So you don't want to go too fast. You don't need training wheels, but you don't want to go too fast. So what are your thoughts on where Western Buddhism might be going in 2026?
Man, I tell you what, there's just this sort of momentum that I see building, and we see it at TBC, but I think kind of more broadly as well. More people are reaching out. I think more people are starting to see that the way we've been operating collectively is just not sustainable.
Right.
And many people are starting to feel at a very visceral level. And I think the desire for new or alternative ways of seeing the world are really growing. And I think to some extent, that's potentially a beautiful gift out of a kind of the craziness that we're seeing around us is the natural result of unchecked ego desires is becoming obvious at a global stage. And then we start saying, okay, well, is there any other way to live? And so, my hope is that Western Buddhism continues to provide a refuge for those folks, and we TBC can provide a way for people to see that there is this alternative way, and it's, as you said, it requires a lot less energy. It's a lot more peaceful, a lot more enjoyable.
Right. Right. I do think that there's an opportunity. Actually, I don't even think it's an opportunity. I think it's something that's already happening. I don't think there's any way to really. I was going to say stop it. That's probably not fair, but it just feels like people are very interested in a more practical, sustainable way of living. People are growing up and out of some of the greed and some of the, I don't know, just some of the anger and some of the fear that maybe has been handed down, and the idea that there are ways to live without that, I think is pretty exciting. Now, whether that's, whether this is the cusp of a big change or whether this is a slow process that will continue to move at about the rate it has so far, it doesn't really matter, I don't think. It just feels like that, hey, this is the only way. Again, it's not a cult, and I don't really care if anybody believes it. It just feels good to live in such a way that I get to be me and you get to be you, and we can be authentic together, because there's not that, like I said, no hate, no fear. So it'll be interesting to see what we get.
Yeah, I think that authenticity is so true. One of the things I love, every person I've ever talked to that comes through TBC, especially people in the orientation class, what have you, they say, we walk in the door and there is just no judgment. Just nowhere in the building is there any judgment. And it's maybe one of the only places that we can go in our lives these days where that's the case. And,
right. Right.
Just what a wonderful, gift to be able to offer.
Yeah. For me, that could not become true until I started Apple practice. I couldn't accept others until I could accept myself. And that's an ongoing thing. It's just like, I can love people better because I love myself better.
Yeah.
And it's really all internal. The outside part is easy once the inside part is right. So I'm going to put that on a t-shirt. I just decided. So let's do this before we wrap it up. You want to tell us a little bit about upcoming classes and where you might be speaking and when?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So Basics of Buddhism is the next class that starts January 28th. We've got 3 spots left, so we capped that at 15. I really tried to keep it small so that we can build a nice, tight-knit community of folks feel really comfortable sharing with each other, because we're going to get into some pretty deep stuff. And the idea there is that we're going to talk about the key concepts in Buddhism, and maybe more importantly, how they fit together. Because it's kind of like, okay, well, there's the 3 marks of existence and the 4 noble truths and the Eightfold Path and the 3 of this and the 2 of that and 9 of these, and who cares, right? Like, right. Why do I care that all of these things are out there? And try to put them together, and we build out a map together that kind of ties these all in and shows you how, if we follow this approach, we're going to experience a life that's maybe more, based on craving, aversion, and suffering, right? So fear and hatred and delusion and all of those. But there's an opportunity to live a life aligned differently that's filled with love and wholeness and peace and unity, connection, and all of these things that we tend to really want at a deep level. Beyond that, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do after that. I typically will offer a class right after basics. Traditionally, it's been the unconditional inner peace, sort of pragmatic joy class, where we learn to connect with the heart and then live from that place. And I love giving that class. There's kicking around the idea of maybe doing an introduction to meditation class, because I think a lot of people are interested in setting up a daily practice, but they need more than just reading a book or watching YouTube videos, right? They want something to come to consistently for 6 or 8 weeks and talk about what's going on, right? Because there really is a stage-based approach to this, in that there are certain things that happen at certain times as we take this human mind architecture and start to transform it. And it's very well documented, and to help people through the early parts of that process, I think could be helpful. So we'll see what happens, but something coming along those lines at some point.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think there are some offerings on how to grow your practice, but I also think that the idea of having a class and getting a group together, that's probably the next step for where we are as a community. So anything else before we call it good?
I think those are the main things. I think, continue to be grateful to the folks in the Sangha who trusted me to work one-on-one with them to help them along the path. And so if anybody's listening and wants a little bit of support, find me on the Meet with a Teacher page on the TVC website. But otherwise, thank you. And I want to reflect back on the retreat. And for those of you listening, Whit was our retreat manager at that facility. And none of this happens without the people planning the retreat, the people organizing the retreat, but without the people on the ground managing the retreat to be that contact point between the facility and the practitioners. And because of the work you did, you allowed everyone else to find that place of no responsibility, of limited decision-making required and so forth. And so it's an incredible gift you gave us. And just thank you very much for the work you did there.
Well, I appreciate you mentioning that. It was a good experience. And thank you, Kyle, for co-hosting the show, for your wisdom and compassion, and also for your friendship. This show and our community are better because of you. And I also want to remind our listeners that you can find On the Range on Spotify, Facebook, Amazon, and YouTube, as well as the Discord channel for TVC. Feel free to leave comments or questions on those platforms or email us at omontherangepodcast@gmail.com. This is your old pal Whit signing off and wishing you happy trails. Thanks to our On the Range production team for making this program possible, and to Mr. Brad Athey for composing and performing the original music. And to you, our listeners, thank you for being a part of this journey as we explore meditation, Western Buddhism, and the path towards a happier, healthier life. Remember, less suffering and more joy are available to everyone. It just takes practice. Until next time, stay grounded, stay kind, and keep finding peace in the simple, practical things. For all of us here at On the Range, happy trails.